I have once again escaped the hermitage of my college apartment to deliver a new video where I ramble about a new movie that I found interesting. And what is that movie? The Batman, directed by Matt Reeves. Now, superhero movies are something that I've been pretty detached to for the last 2 years, I'd say. I've pretty much steered clear of that entire genre because of how boring it's gotten, in my opinion. The reason that Endgame was the end game for me was because of how final it felt for the MCU, and how it couldn't be topped. Honestly, since that point, I've pretty much gone in more of an artsier direction in my taste in film, in no part due to the fact that something like Joker came out and was successful, and it translated to both an artsier crowd and a mainstream crowd, delivering a unique film experience that DC somehow took, which is astonishing considering the fact that DC has been more inconsistent than Marvel, but this shows that DC is willing to give the thumbs up to more random ideas like this than Marvel is, and I think that should be applauded, because at this point Marvel is more consistently steady at what they release and the quality that they release at. But with DC, you never know what you're going to get when you see one of their movies. You could get a Joker, or a Dark Knight, or you could get a Suicide Squad, or a Suicide Squad, or a Batman v Superman. And I think that inconsistency has led to some of the best and worst movies to come out in the last 2 decades. So where does this movie stand? The Batman. Well, let's start with the director. Matt Reeves is someone I'm sort of familiar with. He did the sequels to the live-action reboot of the Planet of the Apes movies, and also the Cloverfield, which I have not seen. But he's done a decent job with the Planet of the Apes series, especially the second one, which was the one I've seen by him. And Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is definitely a dark and dreary movie. I never expected a series like the Planet of the Apes to be that dreary and dramatic as it was, especially considering how much of the original one looks silly and stupid by today's standards, especially with the makeup that they were using for the apes. But I think that also means that he was able to do something similar for this movie, where he managed to make something that in its early days was considered a silly concept of a man dressing up like a bat and fighting criminals and dealing with silly characters like the Joker and the Penguin when they were silly. But since Christopher Nolan's attempt to make it more serious and realistic, DC has tried to replicate that on and on and on. And especially with the Zack Snyder movies, which have led to fucking terrible results. But I can gladly say that this film manages to capture that serious tone that he did on Planet of the Apes and what Christopher Nolan was doing on the Dark Knight trilogy, and brings it into the Batman universe once again successfully. He manages to bring back the more serious elements that Zack Snyder was trying to do and Christopher Nolan succeeded in doing back into the Batman universe in a pretty good way. And what I like about this movie is it doesn't feel like a superhero movie. It feels more like a procedural within a superhero universe that stars a superhero as its main detective going through the procedures of an investigation. And that's what the film is about. It's the investigation of the Riddler's mystery that he wants him to solve. And I think that the mystery element of the film is actually done pretty well. It keeps you on the edge of your seat, and it doesn't feel predictable at most of the moments. Like, yes, you kind of understand that the police force is corrupt, but how corrupt is it? And as the film goes on, you see how deep the rabbit hole goes with Batman's investigation, and why it needs to be a vigilante like the Batman, and why someone like the Riddler is there to expose it. And a lot of the parallels are made in the film between the Batman and the Riddler, especially with the opening scene, where both have a scene of violence and they're both kind of shot in the same way and seen and introduced as something lurking in the shadows. And I like that too, because it feels like the only way that the city's going to get better is by someone who's not 100% transparent, or attempting to be transparent. And I feel like the Batman and the Riddler are given enough to do, but a lot of their character is focused on the story and the mystery and the investigation that the Batman is doing. And I think that focus is what makes me like the film more. If it was something like The Dark Knight or The Dark Knight Rises, where it's two characters, two titans of a character, fighting off against each other and fighting for who's whose morality and whose philosophy is better, I don't think it would have worked because it would have been standing in the shadows of Titans. The thing is, I don't think this film stands in competition with those films. Not because it's not as good. I think it's pretty good. I'll give it that. But it's because it feels like it's its own unique story and it feels separate, and I think that's one of the reasons people find the DC universe so interesting compared to Marvel, is that everything feels distinct within it while still trying to be connected to one another, but that's not lost in the artistry of one single film. I think the fact that it focuses on the story more so than the characters is what makes it distinct from the Nolan movies, and that the way that it does that is interesting comparatively. The mystery and what it was going for is interesting, except for I feel like the actors that they have playing the Riddler and the Batman, I think they could have put a lot more emphasis on Paul Dano and Robert Pattinson, since I think they're both quality actors. They've been in so many great movies, especially in the last 10, 20 years. Although this movie definitely feels like Robert Pattinson's return to Twilight, since his performance feels very subdued and very standoffish comparatively to a film like The Lighthouse, where he's focused on and his character is the main point of focus. Everything is in service to the plot, and the plot is actually pretty good. The riddles leave you on edge, and I was thoroughly engaged with how involving the mystery was. But there are a few moments for specifically Paul Dano where I couldn't take him seriously. There was one point in the film where I think he was introduced and I just started laughing because of how forced psychotic it was. Like, don't get me wrong, as the movie went on, he got better at the performance, but that beginning scene just felt like, really, come on, you're trying to ape past performances and trying to do that like crazy psychotic guy, and it doesn't come off the best. But he's not focused on enough where that's a problem, and I think I like that as well. Another like main point I like about this film is that it's really moody and dark and depressive. It likes to use the song by Nirvana, Something's in the Way, a lot, and it incorporates it into the soundtrack a lot. At the beginning, I did like how they used the song, but after the few times they reincorporated it, it kind of got grating a little bit. And I get why they're trying to do it. It has something to do with how they use Ave Maria, the other song they reincorporated a lot into the score, but all it did was pretty much annoy me. And the score is pretty decent. It's not as memorable as something like Danny Elfman's score for the 80s Batman movies, or even the Hans Zimmer score for the Dark Knight trilogy, but it's not like a high point for the film and doesn't like ever grab my attention. It only does that when they try to reincorporate those two songs, and it's kind of forgettable, but it serves its purpose to the film, and it still adds to the atmosphere. It's not as distinct or memorable as the previous Batman films. And I think that would be a general statement about this movie. It's not as distinct and memorable, but it's still pretty good. I'd definitely consider watching this again. It's very dark, especially with how the cinematography is done. It gives this very grungy and dirty feel to the film. It definitely feels like it was playing off the back of Joker 2019's attempt to have that same kind of dirt and filth of the city, where it feels completely natural. It's aping like a New York feel. And there's a lot of positives for the film, but there's also a few negatives for it, in my opinion. Like, the relationship between Batman and Catwoman feel unrelated and not as developed as you would want it to be, because again, the focus is on the procedural element, and it just feels shoehorned in when you add in this romance plot, and then it doesn't really go anywhere. But there's also a lot of development of the city itself and the environment that I really like, and that's where the film really shines the most for me, is the development of the world. I don't think it bothered me that much when watching it, because I was so engaged and enthralled with the story that I was completely in the zone of the film, and it had me entirely. Even if the character performances and the characters weren't super fleshed out, I think that the way the world is built up, it creates an interesting enough environment for the film to justify rewatches and create a pretty enjoyable experience, in my opinion. For my rating of this film, I'm gonna give it a 7.7 out of 10. What did you guys think of the Batman? Do you think they needed to bring back the Prince soundtrack to this movie? I think that's the one thing that I missed about it. Do you wish I uploaded more? I'm sorry I haven't uploaded it. I know I said back in December I'd upload, but it's been really busy for me with school and my personal life and all that, and also I've just been lazy. But I've been trying to work on a new project, and I hope to have that out soon, but I'll try to upload a few times between the release of that. So stay tuned, and I'll see you guys in the next one.